Hello, once again, this is Chris on the channel Drop Dice, and this is my Chepe Le Pepe disguise. Hey guys, in all seriousness, this is a video response to Chepe Le Pepe's recent video where he is talking about in the defense of monotony in RPG. So like any other time I do a video response, it's going to be linked in the description below. I just thought that would be kind of fun to do. We recently had a conversation saying that we need to get people together wearing driving caps and square glasses and one hangout together. That way we could talk about all sorts of weird niche games just as kind of a fun goof. Inside his video, he kind of talks about basically setting your pacing the way a novel does instead of the way you see a lot of one-shots done. He talks about it being good for mini campaigns and especially for campaigns. And I'm inclined to agree with a lot of the stuff that he talks about inside there. Basically, he's saying that you can't just continue to build and build and build and build. Any good story, when it's written like in a novelization format or even in movies, you'll have moments where it builds up and then it'll kind of plateau for a minute, and then it may even dip down a bit before going back up. He mentioned Star Wars being one of those ones where it builds up and then it kind of plateaus, and then to keep it from being boring, they shift over to another character while they're at their plateau moment and maybe builds a little bit more and then hits a plateau point, or just before hitting that plateau point, they shift back to that old character that's on their plateau. This is a pretty solid format. That particular format doesn't always work for RPGs. Star Wars, because of the format and the way that the characters were and the fact that they were separated a lot of the times, it really does work well. However, not every game is going to work out like that. I agree with the concept to basically introduce normality inside your games to kind of show what the world is like through basic, just normal interactions. In fact, most of the time when I do my games, I've mentioned it before, I'm a little bit of a sandbox GM just in general. That's what my players like, so that's usually what I end up running. So what I do is I build the world around them, and basically I put down little things for them to interact with, and if they want to interact with it, they can. If they don't, they can walk away from it and do something else. But this also gives them the opportunity that whenever they want to seek their own downtime, they can just stop in a town and take their time to explore their own character concepts, do a side quest that has nothing to do with what the party's big goal in life is. And it's actually worked out to be pretty successful. He mentions that sometimes when you read books, those moments where it's a little bit of downtime are actually kind of the more memorable moments. And I'm inclined to believe that because I think for one of my players, he just got a Holy Avenger inside our current campaign, which is the first time he's ever gotten a Holy Avenger, but the way he did it was through kind of a side quest, and we had a little bit of downtime where they got to learn about the one monistic order that's in the world. They've never seen monks before, and there's actually one temple of them. And these monks happen to have like this sacred art passed down on how to make magic weapons, and the art of making magic weapons had been lost to the rest of the world. And so he studied at the monastery, did prayers, and helped in the construction of it. And so now he has this Holy Avenger that he believes that with it, the faith of the gods has led him to the monastery, which we did a little riddle, and he got to solve that riddle to go to the monastery, and then with the strength of the gods, he was able to forge the weapon and the wisdom that he gained from the temple. So he believes that that he now has the okay from the gods to go ahead and carry forth with his mission to destroy this evil lich that used to be the emperor a long time ago, that wants to come back and rule the world again. It's kind of a classy, tropey type save the day adventure. And Chepe talks about, what happens when they save the day. For my campaigns, I typically end it once you save the day, like save the world from the big terrible thing. Just because, like he mentions, if you save the world and then another big bad shows up that was like bigger and badder, and you just keep cycling that same thing over and over, you get to where you have kind of burnout is the best term. He uses a couple of narrative terms, like a spectacle something or other. I don't recall it off the top of my head, but essentially it amounts to burnout. Essentially, what he's saying is you can't have action all the time, or else you'll burn out. And those high intensity moments will cease to be high intensity, and you can't have like bad guy showing up afterward to prove that you're not the strongest thing in the universe, and then all of a sudden you prove you're the strongest thing in the universe, and then another bad guy shows up. He mentions Dragon Ball Z falling into that problem, and I'm inclined to agree. But sometimes there are games that are fun like that. Speaking of Dragon Ball Z, last week we did a Dragon Ball Z one-shot using the Cream Rises D10 system. It was a ton of fun. We played up all the silly tropes of Dragon Ball Z, like my bad guy, like the big bad guy in charge was named Starfruit, and he had like crazy key attacks, but it was a lot of fun. But that kind of game, you kind of expect that. If I'm playing D&D, you might expect two major bad guys at best. Like if you're trying to defeat the world-ending bad guy and it turns out he's not really the bad guy, he's just kind of a puppet, or maybe he was a general or something like that, the next bad guy will show himself, and that'll be the ultimate true bad guy. And I think there's kind of a trick to it. If you want to go that route. And I think the trick is when the new bad guy shows up, the ultimate, if you will, you have to make the heroes lose for a little while. Like, they have to lose. They have to be pushed to the point of, can we really do this? Are we strong enough? And then give them the ability to come back and actually defeat it. That's a trend that I've noticed with a lot of players, actually, is that nowadays it's harder to get people to buy into no-win situations in a game, or losses. They want to push and win all the time, and for story writing purposes, that's not that entertaining, to be honest. Like, if you look at the structure of how the hero's journey is supposed to go, they start off in humble beginnings, and they get going, they're starting to do good, and then right about the middle, they kind of lose everything. And then they kind of build back up for this ultimate showdown. If you have a story that's going to have two bad guys with an ultimate bad guy, what you're basically doing is the hero's journey once around, and then when you get to the end, you actually reveal the ultimate bad guy, and it's like you kind of drop right down to because the hero's journey is a circle, which is why I keep making this movement. You drop down to the bottom to the lost section, and you build back up. You don't have to go through all that beginning of where they're like nobodies and they're trying to earn their name and stuff like that. And I think that style will work if you want to have multiple bad guys, but I wouldn't suggest doing it like 8 times or something ridiculous. If you get a chance, even if you've never seen the series, the original Digimon series is actually a really strong example of this. They beat the big bad guy, and then they find out the big bad guy was essentially corrupted by an ultimate big bad guy. And they kind of lose for a while, and then at the end they pull out the light of day and they save the world, kind of thing. Well, both worlds in this case, from the ultimate evil. And I think that the way it's described in there and the way it's done is actually pretty eloquent, even if you're not a big fan of like kids cartoons from the 90s. But if you are interested, it is on Netflix, by the way. That's kind of a good example of it. Kind of a poor example of it would be something like Power Rangers. I like Power Rangers a lot. I mentioned that I'm going to eventually put together a game of it. But if you look at the original American series, it's like they beat a bad guy who shows up again, and then maybe an old bad guy teams up with them, and then they beat those, and then they show up with a new guy, and it just keeps building. And there's actually a really funny part inside there where they get to like Zeo, where they're supposed to have the most ultimate power, and then the next bad guy shows up, and for whatever reason, the most powerful Rangers, according to canon, are the Zeo Rangers. They apparently don't have enough power to beat this new Ranger, or this new bad guy, so they become the Turbo Rangers, which is like cars and stuff like that inside there, and they're definitely weaker than what the Zeo Rangers were, so it doesn't make a lot of sense. That's kind of an example of what I think a bad way to do it. If you just condense like the first 3 seasons of Rangers, I think that's a pretty good way to do it, because it does follow that pattern of basically starting the hero's journey and then cutting right down the middle and then picking up again. However, that one tends to cut down the middle a couple times because it's the same team. But the Rangers stuff, it works a little bit differently, and I'll talk about that more in detail when I go back into Ranger videos and conversations on the blog. But I think ultimately his point during this whole thing was to talk about how you need to have those levels of just normacy inside your game to really highlight those high event points. To use the Ranger reference, you see this actually every so often. There'll be about like 8 episodes where it's like building up and becoming heroes and all this stuff, and then all of a sudden there's like one episode where a kid wants a friend, and then there's like a monster who doesn't want to be bad, and he tries to be friends with the little kid. And the Rangers find out, and they see that the monster's good, and then the monster gets corrupted, and they have to decide: should we take down our new friend, or should we find a way to stop him? And in a high scale, epic sci-fi type modern game like Power Rangers would be, that is kind of a great example of showing normacy in the game, because you're showing the human element. And it still has those common tropes inside there where you're still going to have action, you're still going to have things that you can do, and I think that's a good way to execute it. I haven't worked out an entirely perfect way to do it in Dungeons & Dragons, but one of the better examples that I can think of off the top of my head is my players went to a town, and they were tracking this guy who had these really, really nice traveling boots, because one of them was Tracker, and I mentioned that. So he went to this town, and he started going to like all the different cobblers in town, because in a medieval society, soles of boots are actually very personalized because you have to carve those individually. And so he went and found this one guy who carves a specific style of boot. And while he was interviewing him to find out about the guy he's tracking, he's also shopping for a pair of boots. And he gets to try on boots and find out which ones he fits him, which ones are best. And he has a pair of boots custom made for him. And it was kind of like a little silly, like, side moment, but like he gets to leave there knowing that his character got a lot of like in-game information while also having a very normal conversation about buying a pair of boots. As a traveling adventurer, that's something that he needs. Some games like Pathfinder have a system for downtime so that you can kind of expedite that process so that you can go forward with the story. I think that that's a good plan, but that's not always the best way to do it. I think if you're doing the downtime to get the specific goals out of downtime, like let's say for Pathfinder, one of the things you can do is adventure to gain some experience while the rest of your party is doing whatever their downtime activities are, like maybe managing a business or doing something like that. I think that's a good way to kind of automate that one player walks off and does like save the cat kind of missions to get himself some experience for a little while. But on the flip side, I think like managing a business, you should use those rules just to have a common rule set for everybody, but maybe you should narrate those a little bit more so that you can highlight that normal life. Chepe also mentioned having them do like normal stuff around the city. In the TV show The Quest, there's actually some moments where they do stuff where they're helping inside the castle. They're doing stuff like sawing wood, sweeping up the castle, things like that, which start off as kind of like a seed point for the next part in the storyline. So while they're sawing wood and stuff like that, the guard captain comes down and he does an alarm and basically has them try and get armor on and says the big bad guy's coming. And then he stops it and he goes, "This was a drill." And he basically tells them that they're not ready and stuff like that. And that's a development thing that comes from a natural progression thing, because naturally your guard captain is going to drill his charges, and his charges are going to try and help out where they can if they're ideally heroes. The other thing that I wanted to mention that Chepe's done recently is everybody's kind of seen it floating around. Chepe kind of put out a one-sided social contract. Basically said the kind of games that he's interested in. If I remember right, it's like 4 pages long, and he talks about what types of games he's interested in, the types of like, not only in the style of like, do I want to play D&D 5th edition? Do I want to play Fate? That sort of thing. He also talks about like what style of play he wants to see, that he's interested in discovering, things like that. I think that's actually a very good way to go about this, because in a normal group you would have a social contract that would actually involve all the players to kind of get an idea of what they're looking for in the game, what they're okay with, what they're not okay with. But inside a group like the one-shot group or the Wild Wild West group or RPGW3 group, basically it's kind of a toss-up of who you get inside your games. And so I think that's actually kind of a clever idea to have this one-sided social contract. But what I'd like to see is it employed by GMs a little bit more, because usually you're going to get players who are coming in, and I think it's a little bit much to maybe require everybody or encourage everybody to do that. But I think if a GM includes on his initial interest post, this is the kind of game I want to play, both system and mood and tone. Chepe is really good about writing those. He recently did one for Bloodborne where he said, okay, we're going to use D&D 5th edition. I think he said, I could be misquoting him, but I think it was D&D 5th edition. It was going to be a grim, dark tone, and the mood was going to be reflected in that kind of, well, a grim tone, dark mood is kind of the best way to put it. And it's basically going to be based off the video game, but not 100%, because he liked the premise of the video game. Which I thought was really cool, was formatting your interest posts like that. Now, the other reason behind the Chepe disguise today is I wanted to talk about other games. So we do a lot of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. There's been more fake games popping up. Dungeon World is kind of gaining popularity, which I'm glad about because I really like Dungeon World. But I would like to see players bringing in more games, just in general. I know that some people play Dragon Age and really like that. I would like to see more Dragon Age, partially because I want to play Dragon Age. I think I might really like that system, but I haven't had a chance to sit down and play it. And I think that having us branch out a little bit more would be more beneficial for both groups, simply because it's one of those things that if you have all the choices in front of you and you don't at least sample them, it's not quite worth having that collection of RPG books that a lot of us have. Like I know that myself, for PDFs alone, I have about 150 gigs last time I looked at it, which is just an obscene amount of books. And I know that there are people inside the group that have even more books than me, but it's like, when was the last time that you played any of these? Are any of these ones that you've ever tried to play or anything like that? And I'd like to see some of those start to come around. If you're interested in stuff like that, there is a group called the Ogre Games where they play legally free quick start rules usually, or free games in general. On there, it's kind of randomly assigned who does what and what days. I know that they were recently changing the rules. Unfortunately, I had to leave the group because my schedule was too strict to allow me the original outline of how they set up the play. But essentially, the design is to start using some of those books that we have on our shelves that we don't really get a lot of use out of. And I'd like to encourage to see that more. Recently, I just did the video for Loose Lips Sink Ships, which was the first part of Souls of Steel, which is a mecha game. And I haven't really seen that on the group, which kind of encouraged me to go ahead and do mecha. It is an Apocalypse World hack, so it is still something that people are a little bit more familiar with. But if there's a system you're looking at trying and somebody wants to run it, I know a lot of people are pretty open to teaching systems. So make sure that if you see something that sounds interesting to you, that maybe you don't have the books for, or you don't really understand the system, you can talk to them. Because a lot of stuff nowadays has quick start rules, and usually if you grab the quick start rules, that's enough. And the GM can help you out with making a character if the quick start rules don't really go over it enough. Or some of these GMs, for like Numenera, which is another popular one that a lot of people, it's gaining popularity, I should say, but not everybody has gotten a chance to play it. I know that like for Chepe, he's looking to play one, but he's going to have pre-gen characters. And I think that that's kind of a cool way to set it up and try new systems. So what I may end up doing is picking out one of my systems after I'm done with Souls of Steel. I've already said that I may try Dungeon World just to get more people a chance to play Dungeon World because I really like it. But I think I'm probably going to look into my collection and see what games I have, which ones I've been interested in but haven't had a chance to play, whip up some characters just for everybody so that you can have a character to show up. Or if it's a system that maybe somebody's familiar with and they want to bring in their own character, then that would be fine too. Which I think works fine for one-shots, because a lot of times one-shots, just like at the conventions, you're trying something new. But I'd like to see a little bit more of that inside the community. So I will join Chepe in the niche conversation here and say, let's start pulling out some of those games. All right, guys, so that's it for me this week. That's been everything for Community Saturday. There's been a ton of stuff going on in the communities. If you get a chance, go ahead and check out the both on Facebook, the W3 group and the OSG or One Shot group. I'll include links for those inside the description as well. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you at the gaming table.